I am proud to present Dominic Alexander Robin. I know him, and yeah, he used to live in Peru. Now he's coming back soon. Communications and writing instructor at the University of North Florida and an English tutor for change. He also works as a guest lecturer at San Pablo Catholic University in Arequipa, Peru. His research interests include Andean studies, theory of aging, and narrative theory. So, go ahead, Dominic.
Thank you so much, Dinah. Thank you, everyone who is here. It looks like we have 11 or so people who have joined. I'm going to say right from the beginning, hello, it's Saulo. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not sure. Where was I? Oh, I'm going to say right from the beginning, I apologize if there are any connection issues. I am in Taxco, Mexico right now. And all over the city right now, we've had troubles with Wi-Fi for the entire week. And so, oh, hello, Carmen. Yeah, so we've had troubles all over the city, and I've looked for other places with better Wi-Fi, and that's just how things are. So if you can hear me, just write hi in the chat, just so that I know that you guys are there, that you can see me. I see Carmen, I see Angelito, I see Saulo.
And just one thing, Dominique, to make sure that there are no background noises, we ask you to please mute your microphones. And remember that when you come up here, this session is being recorded. Okay, so if there are no problems with that, you're welcome to be here.
Right. And if you want to show up and have your video on, you feel free to join. I like to converse. I have a very dialogic style of presenting. So hopefully we're going to be talking mostly through chat, but maybe with some voice too, throughout the entire presentation. So I think sometimes presentations are like 45 minutes where people talk and then 15 minutes where there's question and answers. Mine's more like, hopefully more like questions and answers the entire time. We're going to dialogue this whole time because this is a presentation about stories. I'm really passionate about stories. Narrative theory is my focus. And here, we already did this, but I'll give you just a quick background. I'm an English instructor at the University of North Florida. And I think it confuses people when they hear English sometimes. I don't actually teach English, as in English as a second language. I do that with change, which you guys have heard a little bit about change at the conference. Jota and Dinah is a part of change. So I do teach English on that side, but with the University of North Florida, mostly I do communication for business and for engineers and writing and things like that. And my big focus is narrative theory. And let's just jump right into it. An overview of this presentation is we're going to start with part one, which is theory. We're not going to talk about theory for too long because I think most of you guys are not here just for theory. You're here for like, what can I do practically in my classroom? Like, how can I get this idea and what does it look like actually putting this into practice? And so part two is going to be practice. I wanted to make sure I forecasted that because I want you to know that practice part, the part where we actually kind of read through some texts and talk about narrative theory and about how to do that, that's coming up. But really quickly at the beginning, I'm going to give you a quick theory overview of what narrative theory is. So the simplest definition is that narrative theory is the use of narrative. This can be fiction, it can be nonfiction, it can be film, art. There's so many different definitions of narrative. Sometimes it can be personal narrative, so talking about things that have happened in your life as a tool for facilitating second language learning. And a lot of this comes from Jerome Bruner. Jerome Bruner is actually a theorist in psychology who wrote this book, Acts of Meaning. And Acts of Meaning has been a very, very influential book for me. I recommend reading it. You can actually, I'm not sure how legal it is, but I know that you can just put into Google Acts of Meaning, Jerome Bruner PDF. and you can find it. So it's available. You can find a copy of it. And so the basic idea that Jerome Bruner lays out is this is essential assumptions of narrative theory are this. First, that humans are fundamentally narrative beings, that we're storytellers. And I think this is true. I think that fundamentally who we are is we engage through stories and through connecting data, connecting information to stories, to narratives. Two, because we're storytellers, we sort data, we make sense of reality through the stories that we live and breathe. Three, this means that disembodied facts, facts that are not kind of placed into some type of story structure that gives it a body, they're difficult, maybe even impossible to handle conceptually, or at least to do so efficiently. And so we've all come into contact with this before. If you've learned a second language, whether that be English, in my case, Spanish was my second language. We've all had those moments where someone just tried to talk grammar at us. And how did that go? Great? Not particularly well, right? It was rough. It is for me. It is for 90% of people, because we don't think in grammar. We think in stories. We think in meta narratives. And so I'm not sure if I can claim impossible, but at least very, very difficult to handle conceptually. And then finally, thus, our role as language coaches is to provide narratives in which raw data, and language is data, can live. And so that's the assumptions behind narrative theory. All right, I want to open things up here. So my first questions for you guys are, before we even jump into things, I'm going to give you a lot of information, but I like to interact as much as possible. What do you think the advantages of narrative theory are? I have 10 of them that my wife and I just sat down and we talked through them. We came up with 10. These are not all of them by any means, but I want to see how many you guys can figure out before I actually go through and make all of my points. So if you put it in the chat, maybe the chat, not the Q&A at this point, put it in the chat. And then we can see how many you guys can get. I think you're probably a pretty smart crew. So any ideas? I told you I was going to have you guys interact. So here's your chance. Here's me keeping my word. What are the advantages of narrative theory? Any ideas? Carmen says we can develop communication or communicative competence in our students. Yeah. I think there's a few ways that we do that. First of all, narrative is I think this is the first point that I make here. Stories are fundamentally limiting. They force students to use vocabulary and grammatical structures that they wouldn't otherwise. And so maybe what you mean by communicative competence, Carmen, is that by talking through stories, communication becomes more natural, right? The reason for that, and sometimes I like to view this through an actual student that I had. And so I'm going to call this student Larry, just so I don't give his name. But Larry went from A1, very, very basic learner, to B1 very quickly. And then what happened is Larry got stuck at B1 and got stuck there for a very long time. Why do you think Larry got stuck at B1? This is common. It happens all of the time with our students, right? And sometimes they get through A2 really, really quickly. And then they get stuck at B1. The reason I think Larry got stuck at B1 is because once you get to that level, you're mostly able to communicate what you want to communicate. You can kind of more or less say what you want to say. in a roundabout way. It's not going to be perfect all of the time, but you can do it. And so we were having a conversational class, Larry and I were, and but when he got to B1, he got to a point where he could just make it through. And so the act of conversing wasn't challenging enough, because he's using the same vocabulary, the same grammatical structures, and he's getting by. And so narratives force students to no longer do that. They're going to have to learn new vocabulary. They're going to have to learn new grammatical structures, because that's the way the narrative is. And they have to talk about things that they're not used to talking about. Larry and I, we fell into a pattern. We talk about the same 10 things, right, in class. And narratives pull us out of that. They make us talk about things we don't naturally talk about. So yeah, Carmen, I think you're exactly right. What was the exact phrase you used? Communicative competence. And I think that's one of the reasons. Yvonne, we hear and tell stories since we were children. That's the way we acquire language. Yeah, this is kind of the more naturalistic approach to language theory, which is kids learn languages much better than us adults, right? At least they do it a little bit more accurately. And I think narrative does have some sway in that. I think that there's a big connection between narrative and how kids learn. They act out stories, they play, they sing songs, they have their little fictional worlds where their toys are different people in their worlds, and that's how they engage with language. So yeah, it is a little bit more natural. Angelito, a narrative can act as a bridge to connect transition from one idea concept to another. Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to see if I can connect that to any of the advantages that I have placed here. That might be a new one. Maybe that should be the 11th one. So Ricardo says they learn grammar and vocabulary, but do not have enough time to use it. Dude, that's spot on. Definitely. What we're going to talk about here with narrative when we actually get into practice is how to make narrative conversational. How can we actually use this as a time to converse through texts rather than just reading them or watching? And texts are not just reading. Sometimes it's watching movies or videos or YouTube videos together, things like that. How can we actually make it where they're using the things that they're learning? Flor says to increase vocabulary. Yes, definitely. You have to learn new vocabulary to understand a narrative, whether that's them speaking or whether that's you reading it. That's true. Improves vocabulary acquisition, Carmen. Monica, they can write short sentences. I did not. You know what, Monica, I wish that I had put that in here. I do not have any part of my session that's about writing stories, but I should have, because that's a great idea. I've never done that before. Have any of you guys ever had written stories with your students? Carmen says yes. Yeah, role plays, dramatizations. Yeah, all of those things are true, and they're. I'm realizing now that maybe I should have expanded this presentation. There's so many different ways that these are applicable. Here, let me go through a few of mine that I have here. Stories give students context for the ideas that they learn. We talked about that already, so we're not going to talk more about that. Stories are engaging and intrinsically motivating. As humans, we want to understand them because we're invested in the plot. And as we know, a huge percentage of language learning boils down to motivation. And this is self-explanatory, but motivation's big. Students are, how many hours do they have with you a week? I mean, a couple. They're not going to learn their target language with you. You're going to have to try to motivate them to learn outside of class. And motivation's huge. And so, yeah, 5 hours per week. I mean, that's a lot of time. But still, best case scenario, they're motivated to learn. It's not that they have to be there, they're motivated. When students create, they're forced to exercise language ideation, which is an essential muscle for language fluency. This is particularly valuable for upper level students. We're going to talk about this with pictures, with art, and using it as a way to imagine and create. I mostly have adult students, Some of this works a little bit better with younger students, I would guess, but even my students love to create. They love to imagine. My adult students love to create. They love to imagine. And so the act of just creating stuff that's not there, there are no visual cues, that's important. A couple more stories help you engage culturally with your target language. And so if you're learning English, you're not just trying to learn English, you're trying to connect also to the culture. And so that's also where film comes in, and where novels come in as well. We're going to talk about, well, actually, I'll leave that there. Okay, 5 more really quickly, and then we'll be done with theory. I told you I would do theory very quickly, and I'm going to keep that promise. So like 20 minutes with theory, 40 minutes with practice. That's my goal. Can you guys still hear me okay? I know the internet's been going out a little bit. It's all good? Wow. I'm shocked. I am absolutely shocked. Okay. When students analyze themes or project future plot, they're forced to enter, there's a typo, sorry, into more abstract territories of language use, which is also an essential element of language fluency. This is also true of upper level students. Maybe A1 and A2, they're going to be very tied to visuals, what they can see. But at some point, you want to move away from that into, can you actually pull something out of the ether, out of the air, and create stories? And that's a huge part of actually developing fluency in a language. People often remember with their emotional brains. Stories connect to that. That's pretty self-explanatory. Narratives engage people auditorially and visually. Conversation alone cannot do that. 2 more. In film, students are introduced to new voices and accents other than yours. That's important, because have you ever had a student who's like, I can understand everything that you say, but as soon as I go and try to order something at a restaurant, I don't understand a thing. Why? Because they got used to your accent and they got used to the way you speak. And so introducing them to other ways of people speaking is important. Finally, because they don't change, stories make review easy. You can tell a story over and over and over and over until a student truly gets a target concept. And this is one of the most important ones to me. I think one of the big mistakes I made as an early language tutor was that I would move on to concepts way too quickly. And now, as I've grown a little bit, and I'm still growing, I'm still learning, I've learned a lot of things at this conference already, I've realized that you don't have to move on to ideas. My case study, this is really a case study, is built on around a student. Her name is Lily. And we've been working on this text, the one that I'm going to show you, for 3 months, maybe, for a long time. The same text, the same story, over and over and over and over again, working on grammatical concepts, working on new vocabulary, working on talking about ideas. And she started as an A1 student. She knew nothing. And now she's grown to she's grown to a pretty, she's probably A2 right now, but pushing towards B1. And I think that's super impressive. And so I just want to share a little bit about this. All right, let's move on to practice. How can we best accomplish these goals? This is a story we're going to talk about. Anybody have any guess what story this is? People who know me are going to be like, of course, of course, of course, because you are obsessed with this author. Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, Ricardo, you got it. The Old Man in the Sea, Ernest Hemingway. Yeah, yes. Guys, if you haven't read this book, it's great. It's especially good for language acquisition for a couple of reasons. 1, it's very repetitive. 2, it doesn't use too crazy grammar. The grammar and the vocabulary isn't too crazy. There are some words that you'll have to talk through, and that's good. But the plot is simple. 3, and this is one of the main reasons I use it, besides the fact that I love this story, there are PDF texts available online for the Spanish version and the English versions, both. And so your students don't have to go out and buy anything. They can just search They can just search this text and then and find it and then move from there. So I'm actually going to move away from this. We're not going to just talk about the Old Man and the Sea. We're also going to talk about a painting that I've done with another student. This is Night at the Crossroads by Viktor Vasnetsov. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Russian. And then we're also going to talk about a YouTube video of the Old Man and the Sea and maybe Brother Bear if we have time. All of these are different narratives that I've used in class, and I want to talk to you about how to use them well. But let me stop sharing, and I'm going to switch to another tab and see if it works. I never trust technology to work, so when it does, pleasantly surprised. All right. Now you guys should see a Word document. Can you see it? Okay. So here are the two ways, or two or three ways that I've used the Old Man and the Sea. So this is strategy 1. It's pretty simple. It's just called close reading. You can do this in a class, or you can do it with one-on-one students. I mostly have one-on-one students, but you can do it in a class as well. And so what we do is we read through the English text, and this is good for A2 or B1. Now, there are a few things that you need to know to do this well, because just reading the text, I don't know if that's the best use of your class time all of the time. So, but we're going to assume that you need to use your class time a little bit for reading texts. So what I do is, well, my first principle for success is if you're going to read in class, make the process conversational. And so I have my students read, and I'll have them read this very first sentence. He was an old man who fished alone in a small boat in the Gulf Stream, and he had gone 84 days now without catching a fish. And then we're going to stop. I think a mistake sometimes we make is just keep going. But let's just stop after that first thing. And I'm going to say, okay, we just read that first sentence. I want you to tell it back to me in your own words. Or first, tell me if there are any words that you don't understand. Maybe this concept right here doesn't make a lot of sense because in Spanish, the verb, you just use the verb, right? Pescar, to catch a fish. And so in English, we have 3 different words. And so you can stop and have a conversation about this and say, okay, this is how it's different than Spanish. This is, this is important because we're going to be reading this. And here is one of my favorite things. Let's say your student is like, I've never heard of that before. That's something I want to learn. So what I usually do is you can go here. I'm in Google Docs right now. And you can go into images, search the web. And here, I've already put it in. We have catch a fish. And you can choose any of them, but let's just choose this one and insert it into the text. And I like to do this. This is why I put the text into a Google Doc so that we can actually interact with it. And now I'm going to make the text go around it. And now we have an image. Why are images important? Because words are words. They're representative of images. And so when we speak, we go from word to image to sensorial data, to actually brainwaves. And so when you add that in there, you're adding something concrete, something visual that sparks something in someone's mind. People remember through images often. And so now every time that we go back through this text, we have that right here. And I can say, oh, can you remember like what is happening here? Sorry, what is happening here in this picture? And they'll say, they just caught a fish. And there we go. We have built-in vocabulary. We're going to review that over and over and over again. In the first 40 days, a boy had been with him, but after 40 days without a fish, the boy's parents had told him that the old man was now definitely and finally salao, which I think is a Cubanization of the word salado. But I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I cannot find it in the dictionary, which is the worst form of unlucky. Now, perhaps unlucky is a new word. And what else might I put in here? Here's a grammatical concept, right? It's past perfect tense. And if you have a student who's kind of at that stage, now we've actually, we can actually engage with that grammatical concept in some type of actual narrative context. Right? We're not talking about perfect tense outside of context. We're talking about it in context. And so why is the author using past perfect tense here? It's something that happened in the past, but over kind of extended period of time. And we can have conversations about that now with our students. Let's just finish this off. And the boy had begun fishing. There's another perfect tense. So this is a really good paragraph just to plan to have conversations around perfect tense, past perfect tense. In another boat, which caught 3 good fish the first week, it made the boy sad to see the old man come in each day with his skiff empty, and he always went down to help him carry either the coiled, and they almost for sure will not know that word, the gaff, which is probably not an important word, so I would skip it, harpoon, sail, which is vela, furled, all kinds of new things, flour sacks, flag maybe is a new one, and you can just go through and bold them so that we know to come back to these concepts later on as we work through them. Permanent defeat. This is a hard sentence. I find every time that I do this text, and I've done it with several students now, people have a hard time with this sentence. They don't understand it, so you have to take it slow. You have to talk about it. Another strategy that I like to do is to take a concept here and say, okay, the boy was sad, right? And here's a great time to have a conversation about sadness. And so we're always talking about concepts as we're going through to reinforce them. And so I could say something like, okay, this is a really, really sad. Can you tell me something sad that's happened within the past year? And if you have an open student, they'll be able to converse with you about that and they'll talk about it. Or maybe you can ask them, what is the saddest movie that you've ever seen? And now we're starting to actually dialogue about things. The important thing is don't just read. You have time outside of class to read. If you're going to spend time in class reading, have conversations, talk about things, have people speak up, because their goal is not to just become more fluent readers, it's to become more fluent speakers most of the time. And so if you can have some of your students actually engage with the text, then they're going to understand it much, much better. All right. Any questions about this before I move on to the next one? I don't see any emotions.
I think you're explaining it so clear.
Awesome. Okay, well, let me move on to another one. Principles for success. Ask a lot of questions. We talked about that. Make it conversation. Highlight important vocabulary. Highlight, discuss grammatical structures. Oh, share the document with your student. That's why I use Google Docs. I can hit share and add my students in if they have a Gmail, and then they can study it on their own time. And so that's my 5th principle of success for this. Okay, let's move on to this one right here. Translation. This is a little bit more difficult. B1, C1. This is what I do in my Spanish classes. Spanish is not my first language. I'm not even I'm a middle. I'm a B1 speaker right now. I can say what I want to say most of the time. So I do translation in class. For me, sometimes just reading the text is a little too easy because I can figure things out. So how does translation work? There's a few things that I want you to think about. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Era un viejo que pescaba solo en un bote en el Gulf Stream. That right there, you can translate more or less word for word, and you do that in conversation. That we're assuming that the person that you're teaching is a Spanish speaker, so they read that and they know exactly what it means. But I have them repeat it back to me in English. So he was an old man, he was an old person who fished alone in a boat in the Gulf Stream. And here we can actually see that perfect tense in action. And we work through some of these. I do the exact same thing with this. I add in pictures, I add in photos as we work through But the important thing is there are no more English cues. They can't see the word. They have to come up with it themselves, which is a little bit more difficult an exercise to do. Some principles for success. Translation 2 should be conversational. It's always conversational. And so how do we use this tense in English? How do we talk through that? Solo, only, different things that there's so many different things that you can talk about. Another important thing is focus on ideas, not words. Translation should almost never be exact. And so when I'm looking through here, I'm not going to say, okay, he was un viejo. And so often what we do is we paraphrase rather than actually going through and translating every word. And so it'll be more like, okay, so here we learned that he's an old man and he fished by himself in the Gulf of Mexico. We're not sure where he is, but we know that he fishes in the Gulf of Mexico. And it had been 84 days since he caught a fish. Here we might say, in this part, it talks about the boy and how the boy, it made the boy sad. There's a really good conversation around here, around this, because in Spanish, that's one word, right? And in English, it is not. And so we can talk about that. You cannot actually translate it word for word. You have to translate it concept for concept. And that's something that's really hard sometimes for people to do, especially if they're not super advanced in the language. But it's super valuable because we want them thinking as much as they can, how do you actually say this in English, not how do you translate something from Spanish. A couple other success, ask a lot of questions, same, highlight important vocabulary, use pictures, highlight and discuss interesting grammatical structures, share the document. So in this case, it's exactly the same. It's just more difficult. And personally, as a student, I like this way better. I think that your more advanced students may like this way better. It depends. It depends on your students. Let's move down to pictures. Any of you guys know this picture? I did not before. I was teaching a Russian student. She was born in Colombia, raised in Russia, and then moved to Peru. And so she grew up with this artwork. And so I asked her, you know, show me something cool. And she brought this picture, and we talked about it for the entire class. And so how do you make narratives out of photos? Well, the first thing I do is I just start with description. You can look at this picture and say, okay, what do you see? And then you can fill in some of the vocabulary. Spear, that might be something new. Crow, tombstone, skull, bones, horse, all these types of things. Night, maybe that's a new thing. It looks like it's sunset maybe, or maybe it's a sunrise. We can have a conversation about that. There are rocks, there's a field, all those things. That's a good way to hit some vocabulary along the way. But to make this into narrative, what I do is I have my students actually just tell me what they think the background for this story is. What do you think is happening here? This is really interesting. He's sitting here, he looks sad. His shoulders are slumped, and there's a tombstone, and there are bones here. And so there's a story there somewhere. And so I just have them tell me the story. It might be the true story. Maybe she actually knew the story. So she told me the actual story behind this. But most students are not going to know the story behind this photo. They just make it up. And that's okay. That's fun. There's the act of creation, of ideation, of actually creating something in your target language that isn't given to you. And so maybe this is a friend. Maybe this is his brother, or maybe he's the last remaining member of the Knights of the Round Table for King Arthur. All the other ones have been slowly killed, exterminated, because an empire took over and just wiped out King Arthur's court. And this is, I don't know, it's Gawain or Lancelot. And he's sad. And make up that story and have them just repeat it over and over, making that story bigger every single time. Here's a few principles for success. Begin with description. We talked about that. Have students explain what they think the backstory is. If your students are imaginative, have them invent stories and return to several different, return to the, let's say, picture over several different classes to reinforce learned concepts. That's the idea here. All right, I've got one more, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Oh, actually, I don't. I have two more. I promise. Then I'll push it over to you guys. I have a student who's a nurse, and so the pictures that we use are pictures that they're actually going to that help her reinforce concepts that connect to her goals. And so she wants to know, how do you say these types of things? And so it's the exact same thing. We just sit and we describe what's happening here. It looks like she's giving an IV maybe, and it looks like perhaps he was in an accident, and so you can talk about how he's in an ambulance, and you can do the same exact thing. You create a story, you fill in that story, and there you go. We've used this picture. We've used this picture. All of them kind of work to just hit target concepts, to talk through things, to increase fluency. That's the idea. All right, last one. I promised that we would do video, and so let me just show you real quick how I work through videos. And I'm going to grab this. I'm going to drop it over here. And then I'm going to stop sharing because I'm going to need to switch to another tab. All right. You guys hanging in there? All good? Perfect. All right. Let me switch over. Chrome tab, The Old Man in the Sea. So this is a good thing to pair with the text. You guys can see my YouTube video, yeah? So this is actually it's a painted frame by frame version of The Old Man in the Sea, and it's available for free on YouTube. It's incredible. It's one of the most beautiful short animated. It was a boy, it was a father and his son. They took 10 years to paint every single frame in this. And so I think it's beautiful. And I like to share it with my students so that we can break up text sometimes. You can do this with other concepts. Like one of my students, we're going through Brother Bear right now, which I can't remember. I think it has a different title in Spanish. What's the title of Brother Bear in Spanish? You guys know what I'm talking about? It's a Disney movie where the brother, there's Sitka, Denahi, and Kenai gets turned into a bear. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
Only if you translate it, it's hermano also, but I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I don't think it has a direct translation. It's a Disney movie. It's pretty popular. I wonder if the people in the chat have it. Maybe not. Oh, well. Well, you can do any of the Disney movies. They're really, really good. If you have a subscription to Disney Plus, then you can just share screen and talk through them. What I do with these movies is it comes up, and we're going to do a lot of pausing because these videos, our goal here is to really converse. It's conversation is our goal the entire time. And so right now I'm going to just pause. This is the first thing I do with this video and say, what do you see? Like, it's a young boy. Okay, what is he wearing? What are these? These are ropes. And what's happening? And then we'll play. And tell me, and I might say, if it's an advanced student, what is happening with his hair? Because, yeah, I can share the YouTube link in the description. There you go. There, YouTube link is in the description now. And because they might be pretty advanced, but they've never come across the words, I think it's soplar, right? To blow. They've never come across that word before, because why would they? Why would they ever need to use it? But now they do, because we have a text and we're stuck to that narrative. And so the wind is blowing his hair, and I'll have them explain that. And if they don't know it, we'll put it into their vocabulary and we'll return to it. And as we're going through, sometimes I'll put it on mute and have them explain what's happening, because they know the story. And here we have waves. Maybe they've never had to translate the word olas before. And remar, to row. They're rowing through the waves. there's a beach. We can pause and I can have them describe this. They can see the mountains in the background. I find that most of my students don't know the word foggy because they've never had to use it before, but now they do, because we have it in they have to describe this thing right here. So it's a foggy day. And this is the shore, the beach, however they want to put it. There are canoes here, and it looks like there's a lady with a basket on her head. And so there we go. And then the camera pans, and there are mountains, and they turn into elephants. And I have them explain this to me. And the first time that we do this, they have a really hard time of it, right? They have a hard time explaining something churning, transforming into something else. They have a hard time explaining fog. They have a hard time explaining what's happening in the story. But we figure that out. We talk about it, and then we return to it the next day. And then they have to practice recall to explain to me what happened. What did we learn yesterday? It's foggy. They turned into something. They didn't transform into something. They turned into something. And elephants, and then this right here, maybe they don't know the word gazelle. Maybe they know the word deer. We can put both of those into our vocabulary. And here, my favorite part, lions, right? And you have him explain what he's doing. He's climbing up the net. They might not know either of those words. To see better the lions. My favorite thing is to explain, explain to people that a pack of lions is called, you guys know, what is a pack of lions called in English? I think it's the only animal that has this group's descriptor. A pack of lions is called a what? Trivia question for the day. If you get this right, you win the fake prize. Anybody know? Pride. Orgulloso. It's a pride of lions. Why? I have no idea. English is a weird language. It's a weird language. But we call a pack of lions a pride of lions. And I love telling students that because they all think it's funny. Say like a pride of lions, but that doesn't make any sense. And then there's also a school of fish. And we just talk about it. We just sit there, we talk, we have fun, we laugh. Yeah, because lions are proud. They're I don't know. Yeah, we associate lions with pride, so we call them a pride of lions. I guess they have to be proud of themselves that they're in a pack and they're lions. They won out on the genetic lottery. And they weren't ants. They got to be lions in life. I don't know. It is. But we sit and we talk and we laugh. We learn the word waterfall here. It's fun. They're on top of a waterfall. Yeah, maybe because it's king of the jungle. I mean, yeah, that just makes sense, right? So already at this point, this is like a full class for me. We've spent this whole time, especially with a beginner student. I've done this with A2 students. So students who are just learning. And we spend a whole class on this first minute and 30 seconds because there's so much to learn, so much to talk about. And it's interesting and it's fun. And I find that students love it because they're engaged in watching something. And they want to know what happens with the story. And then we'll just keep going because it transitions. There's the ship. And then it transitions here to the old man, which is where the story starts. And so now they have to explain to me what they just figured out, which is that this was a dream. He's dreaming. They started out with a dream. And so there's a brand new word, and we can talk about it. When the other characters start coming in, there's Manolin, who's the boy. They have a conversation. And if the sound was turned on, which I don't have this sound turned on, the sound was turned on, you'd hear Manolin speak. And we talk about their conversation, which practices their comprehension skills because they have to understand their accents. They have pretty basic American accents and they don't speak too quickly, so it's not too hard to understand. But here I just have them exactly the same way. I describe what they're doing and then we go from there. Guys, let me make sure that I haven't missed anything, but I think that's my presentation. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and check my notes real quick to make sure I didn't miss anything, but I don't think I did. I think that's about it. So guys, I think we have 12 minutes left, right? Cool. With the rest of our time, let's just open it up for questions. Do you guys want to do questions in the chat or the Q&A tab?
There are some questions in the
perfect.
chat, a few, and also one or two just
cool.
thoughts about
Well, let's
it.
do the questions in the chat, just so we're not in two different places. So if you have a question, put it in the chat, and I'll just spend this next 12 minutes talking. If you want to ask by voice, go for it. That's great. But if you'd rather write it in the chat, that's fine too. All right. Any questions that you noted, Dinah?
Yes. Well, one I thought it's important from Carmen at the beginning. It's not a question exactly, but she says, I write poems in my native language and in English too. So I try to teach my students how to write poems and they enjoy it.
Yeah, I didn't even talk about writing. I going back, I wish that I had. If I could go back and add a new section into this, I would. But I've never done that with my students. So maybe I would rather go attend a conference where someone talks about this than actually teach about it, because I'm not sure I'm qualified. Mostly what we do is these three tactics, and writing sounds like a great idea.
Sandra Masuelos. Dominic, do you use this translation practice for comparison between L1 and L2?
Comparison, maybe. Let me try to figure out what you mean by comparison. So like comparing how you say things differently in the first language and the second language. I would guess that's probably what the question meant. Who asked the question?
Wait, it was Sandra Masuelos.
Okay, Sandra. Yeah, I mean, we have conversations about that so that we can talk about grammatical concepts. And so here you can talk about how, adjective placement in English in comparison to Spanish. And then you just have a conversation about grammar. I never teach grammar outside of context. We always talk about it in context when we're going through a story. And so, yeah, you do compare the languages. And you say, oh, like, this is interesting. This prepositional phrase happens right in the middle of the sentence in English, but in Spanish, it always comes at the end. Why is that? Let's make some more sentences, and sometimes we'll just create sentences at that point. We'll go off on a tangent. You don't have to stay on topic. We'll go off on a tangent, and I'll have them create sentences with one of those prepositional phrases in the middle instead of at the end. And it's a good way to just reinforce concepts and note the differences between the languages.
Rocio Romero, it's interesting how you engage students in the description of a scene. How do you motivate them to continue with the story so they become more interested on it at home? I think the word is interested.
The best way I can answer this question is try to choose a story that they like. And that you can't really force someone to be interested in something. And so I don't know if they hate fishing. Maybe you don't do The Old Man in the Sea. I mean, yeah. Sometimes you maybe it's good. It's a good idea to give them ownership. Maybe if it's like with that photo, for example, the painting, I had my student choose that. I didn't choose it.
Yeah. Well, Mónica Calla Flores I think is talking precisely about that. She says, students love to write small paragraphs about Peruvian traditional festivities, and they use images.
Yeah. I think writing is a really, really important way to engage with a language, and it's a little bit less intimidating than speaking, because you can sit there and figure it out, whereas with speaking you have to talk. You have to get it. You have 2 seconds to figure out how to say it, or it's awkward because you've had a long pause. So I think writing's a really good way to have people engage and push themselves. I love conversation. I love dialogue. There's a theorist, Mikhail Bakhtin. He's from Russia. He's dead. Well, he was from Russia. But he has a theory called the dialogic theory of learning. And his idea was that people learn through dialogue. Everything he did, it's very platonic in the way, like, it's like Plato. It's like Socrates, where you spend class talking. And so all of my classes, we just talk. And yeah.
Do you think that works with young people too?
Yeah, but you play games, you
Okay.
know, but it's dialogic still. I don't teach young people. My wife does, Christina, and she's a champ. She's a pro. She's good at it.
She's really good at it.
She's really, really good at it. And they just play games and they sing songs. But singing songs puts things into the narrative too. It gives it a narrative structure, and then there's a flow to things, and then you sing the songs, and then you don't learn the vocabulary, you learn it in a song, which is a narrative, which is a context. And that's how children learn, and that's how adults learn too, I believe.
Monica Calle again says that when you were showing us the movie about the old man, she says, I would ask students, what do they feel when they see these short film or pictures in general? What do they feel?
Yeah, you ask the students how they feel as they're going through. Yeah, definitely. That's a great way to talk about emotion. That's what I mean by conversation. You're using it as a vehicle, as a bridge to conversation, but you spend most of your time talking. And that's Ricardo says many people do not enjoy reading books and anymore, and that's true. And that's why sometimes you can't just assign it outside of class. You have to, because people won't do it. You have to do it in class. But just reading a book in class can be boring, right? And I don't think it's all that helpful. That's why it has to be conversational the whole way through. You're talking about things. You ask, like, okay, like what's your own personal experience with sadness, or like aging? He's getting old. He's an old man and he's failing. And it's like, does that remind you of your grandparents? Tell me about your grandparents. Or all kinds of different conversations that come out of that. And so I can't give up books. I think they're super valuable. And I know students sometimes aren't going to read them outside of class, so read them in class. And just make sure that your time is used well. You're adding pictures in. Maybe you reward them by watching part of the movie as you get through different segments, so they have something to enjoy. Yeah, they love watching TikTok videos. I've never used TikTok in class because I'm too old. I don't know how to use TikTok. I don't know, man. Kids these days. But
Monica Calia also says, I think we should invite them to create another story from the original to motivate the students.
Ooh, I love that. And that goes to my point about creation and ideation being a big part of fluency. At some point you have to move away from just from easier ways of engaging with the language to the really difficult ones, which are creating in that language. Abstract thinking, talking about themes is really difficult. And so having conversation about like themes of a story, or yeah, you're right. Like the ending of The Old Man in the Sea is it's not sad, it's not happy. It's probably more sad than happy. And so maybe if you have students who are upset by that, you have them remake the ending. And yeah, that could be fun. I've never done that before. I don't know. I'm learning things here. I do it different every time, but I've now gone through The Old Man in the Sea several times with several different students.
Okay. Well, we don't have any more right now because, as I said, but somebody also said the same thing as I did, that you explained it so clearly. I took a lot of notes. I learned a lot of things, and I'm sure all of us have. So
there's actually one here. It's in the Q&A tab over here, so I clicked over there. And I'll do that one real quick since we have 3 minutes.
But that's the one you already answered, Rocio Romero.
Oh, you already asked. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, you have 1.5 minutes to ask any questions if you have them. If not, then
yes, Beldad Fenko is saying something. Maybe you want to read it.
Okay, says that was a challenge for a colleague who had to teach English literature at first time at the beginning of this pandemic. So we used to teach physically, and she had to adapt her class using interactive activities. Yeah. That's the important thing. Don't just read in class. You're gonna lose people fast. Read and adapt using interactive activities. You gotta have fun. Like I do teach literature sometimes, and I love it. I know people who teach Shakespeare, which seems like a nightmare because Shakespeare is like, people already don't like reading, and then Shakespeare is like really hard. And so what do? They act it out. They do plays and stuff, and that helps people engage with things. So yeah. All right. Thank you, Monica, Ricardo, Carmen, Beldad, everyone who is in the chat. I appreciated it. I am shocked that my internet held up this whole entire time. I think divine intervention, because it has not worked this well for the entire week. And so
Excellent.
God has smiled upon us. All right, guys.
Thank you so much, Dom. As always, I just love listening to you, and I learned so much.